Welcome to Redefining AI, where we explore the cutting edge of artificial intelligence and its impact on society. Redefining AI, it's the tech podcast hosted by me, Lauren Hawker Zafer, on behalf of Squirro, the enterprise-ready generative AI platform. Now, today we're happy to welcome Anders Indset onto the show. Anders, he is a distinguished thought leader and fifth-time Spiegel best-selling author. He's renowned for his innovative insights at the intersection of technology, leadership, and philosophy. What a combination. Now, with 6 international books to his name, Anders, he's been recognised by Thinkers 50 as one of the most influential thinkers shaping the future of these fields. He's got a book that's forthcoming. It's called The Viking Code, and it's set to release in September 2024. Now, in this book, Anders explores the secrets behind Norway's remarkable success in sports and business. He advocates for a new performance culture rooted in values, positivity, and intrinsic motivation, offering valuable lessons for leaders across various sectors. Now, as a catalyst for change, encouraging a dialogue that transcends traditional boundaries and unlocks the potential for sustainable entrepreneurial success, it is a great pleasure that we've got you here on the show. Welcome, Anders.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you, Lauren.
Where are you today?
I'm actually back in Frankfurt, in home in Germany, where I live. It's good to have a couple of days off from travels. So have a good, quiet weekend ahead.
Have you lived in Germany a long time? Or?
I've actually lived in Germany for the past 24 years. I moved from Norway, and I was going to take a year off from my studies, and I've extended that a couple of times. So I'm in Germany.
Yeah, there's a lot of intrinsic value, enjoyment that is offered by Germany and the German culture. Obviously, being in Switzerland, we're closely affiliated with the German culture. So obviously you're someone that sort of talks a lot about the individual, in various different directions. Let's say someone were to ask you to describe yourself in 3-4 words. How would you describe yourself?
Yeah, I'm a learner. I used to be a very tied up to capitalism and the extrinsic motivation to achieve finite goals. I was a professional athlete, built my companies, but I didn't really feel success. And today I find myself personally successful to me because I can get up every morning and learn. And this is also a part of the journey in terms of, moving towards artificial intelligence in a general term, going beyond the skills that we humans have. Is what remains is the liveliness, the vitality of life. And I cherish that. I value the progress, the micro ambitions every day of moving forth and learning. So I would just describe myself as a learner, and I'm a very curious person, and I'm interested generally in everything where I can learn something.
Would you say that something changed that though? Because obviously you mentioned at the start that, that you had a very different approach or mindset or maybe definition of how you would define yourself or categorize yourself, sort of adjectives, whatever. Was there anything that changed that? Or would you say that you've always been a learner somewhat?
Yeah, I've been always curious. I will always been very multifaceted. And in today's era of generalists, that comes in hand. But I think the most crucial part was as I dug deeper into philosophy, I was always interested in reading philosophy. And to me, philosophy was always a thinking practice. So I reflected on my thoughts. I found answers and reflections of the past that I wanted to think about in my time. And then obviously to initiate projects or to invest in companies where I can see those thoughts come to life. So I think the transition was going from a purely reactive, outside-driven focus to one where I listen to the things that I don't want to do, that I cut out the things that, suck out energy or hold me back from moving on. So as in comparisons to optimizing the past, I came more interested in anticipating the future and trying to think about, how we will live 5-10 years down the road if technology continues exponentially and so on. So I kind of sort of detached myself from that optimization game that we have been sucked into, in particular due to the rise of social media and the constant comparison. So that was a transition, but it wasn't really one special happening. It was more of a slow transition, and I still continue myself on the beginning of a very exciting journey on exploiting all these interesting fields.
Not to go off on a tangent, but before we started, obviously, the recording, we spoke about that you'd recently visited Turkey and that you'd been presented with a certain scenario where you were talking about the fallacy and individuals scrolling Instagram. Now you've mentioned the rise of social media again. Is this something of prominence in your own exploration in humanity, technology? I mean, if it's classified as technology, it's an art expression.
Yeah, I mean, the past century was about the classical understanding of existentialism, the angst against the finitude of life. And now we are moving towards longevity, and we have detached ourselves from some of these existential boundaries. So people are not so worried about the finitude of life. They are confused in a life of reactionism. So over the past 50 years, through the rise of technologies and capitalism, we have created a much better world. There has never been a better time to be alive today. We have never had more time, in particular the regions that we have never had more time than we do have today. But still we feel exhausted, we feel worn down, it feels like crisis. And this has introduced to me, a new existentialism that I'll be writing about in the future. I called it a state of being undead. So
Undead, okay.
Undead. So the lights are on, but there are no one home to perceive them. So the reflection of your own experiences, the consciousness, the qualia gets lost to a reactionist driven society as one of optimization. And obviously how we communicate through social media has just hijacked that and put that on steroids. It's a thumbs up, thumbs down society. That is a division. It's obvious. It's a binary way of looking at the world. So I think the past, in particular 10 to 20 years, have driven a lot of young people and our generation into a quick reaction instead of one of reflection. So we have maximized the art of being right. Your opinion and my opinion are not opinions. They are factual states of us that we cannot open up. And you saw that in the US, and you saw the switch now at the recent change of events in August, where all of a sudden you tap into collectivism, you tap into progress, you tap into possibilism, where the possibilist is the one that seeks potential future that is not in a finite answer, but a better problem. So we are coming back, obviously, but I think, in a retrospect, that was a big challenge because the reward was given to the likes and the shares and the reaction that we have within a short period of time. So maximizing reactions, maximizing that particular game led us to that type of communication. And to me, it seems like it also brought a lot of division. And now, obviously, we are probably being forced back to thinking, reflecting, and the art of being wrong, and seeing that as an art form. And then we are back to what I think is the only, reasonable thing to strive for as a species, is to create better explanation and to have progress, which is to me also very fulfilling because you fill your life with some kind of purpose through your actions and activities. And that's what brought me to the book also on the Viking Code, which is about activation and collectivism and creating a high performance culture rooted in deep values.
Fascinating. So many fascinating thoughts and avenues to follow. What was of pertinence there is your use of not only in what you've just explained there and shared, because you spoke a lot about reflection, individuals and reflection in allocation or association with this reactionism. You also spoke in your own a couple of answers about your ability to reflect on thought. And also, as you've mentioned, the Viking Codes, your book that's coming out in September, you're talking about how businesses can apply the Viking Code to create high-performing teams while maintaining positive value-based cultures. And you also, I think your work often emphasizes this importance of the art of being wrong. So my question is maybe, which I think listeners will be interested in, how can leaders then cultivate this mindset to drive, adaptability, innovation?
Yeah, I mean, let me touch on two things. First of all, particularly in German-speaking region, there seems to be having a glorification of coming up with some celebration of a failure culture, right? And I never got that. I think the problem is we don't celebrate progress enough. We don't, have an incentive for change. We just regulate and we, put borders on things that we shouldn't do instead as, leading people through positive inspiration towards change of behavior. So celebrating failure is something that is not natural to human beings. Of course, I don't want to have a failure-driven doctor doing an open surgery on my heart, or a creative, disruptive pilot flying into the airport of Zurich. So I think that was a misunderstanding. Failure is obviously a part of the journey, but to aim for progress and to aim to go beyond your capabilities is natural to human beings, because that's how we are born. Toddlers, try to get up on their feet, and it's the reward of progress, the learning, that gives you motivation and power to continue. So when we take that out, that's something that is bad. And the second part I want to touch upon is the misunderstanding of the importance of collectivism. So when you strive for performance, that was seen as something, bad, because it was individualism, it was not for the collective. But in fact, the opposite is true, because if everyone else around you are uplifted and you want to continue to progress, you are better off, because you can strive even more. Because if you're in an environment where people grow, you can always measure and share and do on a collective basis, have the possibility to rise more. So we see that from sports, right? So a team where everyone else is performing and you want to be like, put in the extra effort, you have a better working environment. And if people come to work to have that kind of culture, then performance also becomes something positive. What we have seen is that performance has been forced work, to react to task. Managers that drive people to do something, overseeing work and reaching for high goals and being measured by finite goals in a binary way, failure or success, instead of the actual progress. So that's why performance all of a sudden became something negative. And to perform, to act. And even Goethe wrote about that in his famous writing Faust, where he says that at the beginning was not thy word, but the action, die Tat, as he writes in German. And that's the Handlung, the Tun, the activation on doing. And I think that's one of the core essences of human being, from an intrinsic motivation to act, instead of being forced to react. And the forced reaction puts performance into something exhausting, whereas an active action where I have an infinite power. I have an infinite potential to grow and to also cherish these moments. And that's a vital society. And I think we do good in having a vital and dynamic society to live in. I think that's good for humanity. And that's why I try to combine these elements.
So where do humans then struggle? Because I've also been in organizations. I've worked in many different organizations, but then you look at the collective attitudes and approaches to try to establish, and especially if you're looking from a leadership perspective, to establish this high performance, progressive culture. But there's so many nuances that sort of push against it. So what concrete actions and what is the sort of Achilles heel in actually progressing into a state like that?
Yeah, let me try to take again an analogy to sport, because I think it's very symbolic for the organizational structure. So when you win a game in sport, it's celebrated in that finite moment, and that's okay. But it's not a finite game that we have in business, right? So having a celebration for milestone is fully all right. That's fully okay. We should do more of that, the celebration. But the finite game, as a game of soccer, is 11 against 11, 90 minutes, and there's a finite winner. Business is not like there are complex things that we have. So we have to find analogies to sport where we celebrate progress and celebrate victories. And then there is the practice field, where there is not a finite game where there's a finite result. It's where you try out new things. It's where you go beyond. So to understand the differences in the organization, to say the management, where management is all about stability and to speed it up. Agile organizations are good when the processes are very stable, because high velocity and speed requires very stable processes. So that's why technology is very good for management. We don't need people to manage stuff. We need more technology. That's where things have to function. So if you're playing the Champions League game, your organization has to function. It's high performance at its utmost. And then you have the practice practice field. That's where you progress and go beyond. That's where leaders rise, where people show the direction, where they get into that communication and we tap into vulnerabilities. And there are awkward moments, but that's our playing field. That's where we screw up and make mistakes. That is where we as a collective can rise beyond the sum of its part. And to facilitate in an organization for this is where we perform and this is where we play in a certain of not a lightliness of play as is something not serious, but to have the game as such as we play in business, to have it as playful in order for us to grow. That is very important. And I think leaders today are not good at distinguishing. And the challenge is that we don't spend time on it. And the second challenge is obviously we get lost in a buzzword bingo of very important words of purposes and new works and what have you not, without clearly saying and making it relatable for the people. So it just becomes a fluffy blah blah, and then it gets back to the reaction, and then it becomes exhausting because no one understands what is going on, and we're just solving tasks. So I think that's the essence, the nucleus of trying to solve these paradoxes or ambiguities to open up the organization to become a learning organization, so to speak.
Right, it's a great analogy. It's good advice. And now that you've mentioned tech, I'd like to make a segue onto that as well. So obviously, in the specific role of philosophy, also shaping business strategies, encouraging positive, inclusive behavior, where do you see the role of philosophy and also models in the age of AI and quantum computing? Like obviously you spoke about, technology doing certain tasks in organizations. It's a great time to be alive. What's your envisionment there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, Lauren. I mean, 15 years ago, I started to play at the intersection of philosophy and business. Why? Because I saw all these philosophical questions popping up on the boards that I was on and talking to leaders. And I thought, this is where we're heading. We strive for experts in a knowledge society. But if we're going to create an AI where we have almost free access to infinite knowledge, it is not going to be about knowledge, right? That's something for the computers. It's going to be about understanding. So we were immediately in the whole essence of wisdom and trying to see relations and seeing between, the void between the dialogues and to make progress. So we were very deeply in the philosophical realm. We have all the ethical questions, and that same thing has now happened with science. So there have been a lot of writing about crisis of science. And I don't follow all of that, and I don't necessarily agree because there are a lot of great scientists that go after these deep questions. But there are many good scientists that have also found their future path in philosophy. So there is something to that in terms of what we are trying to do. So bringing you back to my experience in Turkey at the foundation of the cradle of humanity at Göbekli Tepe 13,000 years ago. So we are taking now old methodology and moving that into facts, into knowledge. So we are kind of sort of moving towards a very strange new world where methodology and enlightenment are united. So what does that mean?
I was going to say, what does that mean?
So if you think about that, if in terms of having, if you're going to have a stable quantum computer that can do all the scenarios that we envision, we will have AI on steroids, and we have very many new ways to think about that. As a species, we will merge with technology, and all these philosophical questions will then pop up. So in the past 50 years, business was built on, can we do it? Right? Is it possible to monetize? Can we move beyond and have a temporary monopoly to capitalize on an idea? In the future, and going to the outmost of the extent of this implication, if you have an idea, it is already there. So the challenge does not become, is it possible? Because we can do literally everything we can imagine. The challenge for humanity will then be, should we do it? So it becomes much more a value-driven dialogue on what is a future worth living? What do we want to do? If we envision the exponential progress of energy, we will have, the marginal cost of energy drop like the cost of knowledge did with the entrance of LLM within the next 10, 12, 15 years. So we will literally have free energy for everyone. What does that mean? And these are like highly, philosophical questions because it reorganizes how we live and interact. And if we take that to the extent of mapping our brains, and tapping into the neurons and building Ubermensch or Supermensch, where we can see have red, infrared sight or hear like an eagle or whatever, those become very, very interesting question in relation to what does it mean to be a mensch, a human being. So I see that today. I see it's strongly tied to capitalism and the economy. I see the philosophical nature of what I said at the beginning, that to me, philosophy is a thinking practice, that the theoretical implication of philosophical questions are now to be solved in a practical matter. And that's a very, very challenging, but also very interesting future ahead.
It's a very interesting future. And I think, and maybe you can comment on your own observation and thoughts around this, but I almost feel that it's because of the progression, or not necessarily the progression, because that's the wrong word. It's like the public awareness or visibility that's been placed on like AI, quantum computing, etc., that we've been almost pushed into this sphere of actually thinking about, as you've mentioned, the mensch, like this whole philosophical component. I mean, there's so many narratives about the ability of, or the association. I had a previous conversation with Pedro Domingos, and he was talking about obviously this little inner mention in your head and the association that people will have with AI to be able to reason, to think, to act. And obviously this is bringing up a lot of discussions around the philosophical questions that rise with the rise of the machines or the super mensch. What's your thoughts on that? Like, is it a good thing, a bad thing? Do you think that that's why it's happened? Do you see this intersection more and more?
Yeah, I think starting off, I think progress is inevitable. I don't think, we will see a downscale and have the Nokia 5110 and go back to, slow bandwidth. I don't see that. I see exponential growth in many, many fields. And the implications of that is obviously then these type of scenarios. So is there an inner, thing? We have no idea, basically. We do know a lot about, once the neurons have fired. So we are thinking about thoughts. But what sparks the magic of the horizon of a thought? Where does it come from? There are many theories of consciousness and the foundations of intelligence, but there is certainly no answer to that as of now. So the various views have all, flaws, and I sympathize with many on some days, but there isn't a clear path that we will see. Obviously, there are visions about some higher state of consciousness where we free ourselves from our, as Stephen Hawking called it, the chemical scum of our body, where we hack biology and we rebuild the functions. And, restoring functionality is one thing, but why do you want to get stuck in a biological body? That like a questions that might pop up. So if you can upload your mind, and all these questions then become very, very, philosophical in terms of that. If you download a thought from a cloud, will you realize the thought in your brain? How will that be experienced? If you map your neurons, the 83 billion or whatever neurons, is there a point where like the conscious experience gets lost? Or is it the other way around, that through information processes and the complexity of higher performing computers, it gives birth to consciousness? So we will have AGIs that have conscious experiences. We will have human-like artificial intelligence, artificial human intelligence that my good colleague Florian Neukert and I write about in our Singularity paradox that will be out next year. So artificial human intelligence is basically like replicating, because we have hacked biology, we understand the brain. So these are like all things that are now being tapped into. People are starting to look at the brain as a quantum computer, where at first, it's too small, it's too warm, it's too fluffy, it's too fluid, there is no way. And then, there people start to look at phenomenon like microtubule, there are quantum phenomena inside of the neurons, and then you can measure some of these things. And so I think we are ahead of some very, very, very interesting discoveries in chemistry and biology, and also through the neurosciences and the activities of now on on the lights of like Neuralink with Elon Musk, mapping these first initial smaller states of the brain. So I think, the collective wisdom of these fields that are now being mapped together and then enhanced by at first LLM, then what I call large expert models like LEMs, where you have specialized knowledge to enhance it and you give that access to everyone. We just speed up development. So all the things you mentioned, we are on a path where we'll have probably breakthroughs and new understandings, also from nature, psychedelics and all that, all the research that we have never seen before. And that leads me to that conclusion that we are moving more and more into this space of knowledge, which of course will clarify a lot of mysteries. And there are many aspects, it could be religion and psychedelic experiences. All of these things now are a part of this gigantic cosmos of progress that is being driven to the collective wisdom of humanity paired with AI and likely in near future quantum AI, which is basically literally just AI on steroids. So I see that as a very exciting future to tackle some of humanity's greatest challenges. At the same time, I see that as an unimaginable future of risks and challenges unlike we have never seen before. So it's a very, very interesting debate on which side you're on. I'm on the light of possibilism, and I think that the challenge is that we just have to spend enough time on the philosophical questions, enough time to think about security, and enough time to have enough people on the field of making assumptions about possible implications so that we can turn it down as in comparisons just to try it out, which was a good way in the past, but maybe not today.
It's a great insight. The only question that I have in all of that, and obviously there's many sides of the debate that can be debated, do we want to solve the mystery? I mean, that would be my question. I mean, is the mystery not what makes it interesting as well? It's like we have the ability then to solve the greatest challenges, but as you highlighted, if we solve the mystery, is that
I'm very. It's a wonderful, beautiful question, and I'm a romantic in that field because I say so with some understanding of science and physics and relation to it. So it's a statement that has a lot more baked into it than me just putting it out there. But as long as we strive for trying to figure out what the mensch is, and we do not have the answer, the future looks bright. Mm-hmm. So that's the journey, right? It's not about the finitude of the answer, and this is also related to Buddhism and philosophy. It's the journey.
Your thumbs up.
Yeah, that was just my answer. But that to me is the core essence: is to fill the void with substance, but to never end. And that is, as long as we don't know what the mensch really is, it is a wonderful journey to nowhere. And that journey is exciting if you learn how to experience the progress within the journey. And to me, that's a very fulfilling life. So do we want to solve it? Yes, we want to solve it. Do I hope we don't solve it? Yes, I hope we don't solve it.
It's been an absolutely brilliant conversation. I want to thank you, Anders. Our time is, however, finite, so we will have to stop here for today. I'm sure that everyone has as well found it very beneficial. It's been an explorative avenue of many different paths. So thank you for being on Redefining AI.
Lauren, thank you so much for having me.